Well, hello and welcome again to our small group time in the book of Proverbs. Today, before we get started, I want to ask you, do you like to travel? We've talked about this before, and you know I love to travel. And when I travel, sometimes I don't know where I'm going, so I have to pull up the little map on my phone and put in my destination and whatnot. And it usually gives me a couple paths to get to where I'm going. There's a dark blue line, and there's a lighter blue line. And the light blue line says, 7 minutes slower, 30 minutes slower. And usually you take the dark blue line, but there's always a choice. You can take the scenic route or you can take the direct path. And so today, Solomon is going to talk to us about two paths. Our life is a journey. And it's a journey of choices that we make, and the choices we make put us on a path through life. It can be a path of wisdom or it can be a path of folly. So our life is a journey that is simply a series of choices made daily. So let Solomon help us understand how to stay on the path of wisdom. Let's look at Solomon chapter 4, verses 11 through 13, and see how Solomon describes wisdom. I have taught you the ways of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. So here Solomon begins to outline the doctrine of two paths. And he's going to say one is a path of wisdom, one is a path of folly. And something interesting about paths, when I was little, like preschool little, we lived next door to my grandmother. And she had a nice big side yard between her house and our house. And we were always back and forth. I remember one of my earliest memories going next door, borrowing things like cinnamon and sugar, bread, cinnamon toast. And so we would go back and forth constantly. And over time, her nicely mown side yard developed a dirt path right across, a direct route from our front door to her back door. And over time, that dirt path actually became an indentation in the ground. You see, path making takes time. Path making takes effort. And it's interesting, Jonathan Aiken says this way. He says, wisdom is a progressive thing. It's not something arrived at. So as we walk the path of wisdom, we will begin to understand the way it flows. But it takes time for us to develop those rhymes and rhythms in our life. Solomon says in verse 11, I have taught you the ways of a wise life. I've even held your hand and walked with you along that way, along that path. It's a smooth path. You can even run on that path, verse 12 says. But how do we maintain our way on the path? Look back at verse 13. What are the three admonitions given by Solomon in verse 13? He says, hold on to instruction, do not let go, guard her. So take a moment and discuss what that means in your life. How do you hold on to wisdom? How do you not let it go? And how do you guard it? Have you ever traveled to a bustling city, or maybe you've been in a foreign country and you've wandered through a vibrant marketplace? Well, an experienced traveler will tell you one thing to do if you're a man is to take your wallet out of your back pocket and put it in your front pocket. And women will take their purses and put them on the front and hold them tight around them to guard what's in them. Those are important things in there. It's money, your credit cards, your ID, your passport maybe. And so you want to guard it. Well, Solomon is saying the same thing about wisdom. He says, I've given you the knowledge to walk on the wise path. Now you need to guard it. You need to hang on to that information. And we do that by daily walking with the Lord. But it's an active process. We don't just willy-nilly walk down the path of wisdom. We don't willy-nilly follow the guidelines of the Lord or the advice of Proverbs. We have to actively pursue wisdom in our life. I want you to take a moment and look over at John 10:10 and discuss this question. How does following God's wisdom lead to life? And the second question is, what happens to our ability to choose the way of wisdom when we do not take seriously the consequences of choosing the opposite of wisdom? Discuss those questions. All right, let's keep reading in verses 14 through 15 and see what Solomon says about the other path. Do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. So this is pretty straightforward. Solomon says to stay on the path of the wise, we need to avoid the path of the wicked. He says don't enter it. Don't walk on it. Avoid it. Turn away from it. Pass on when it comes near. We must make a decision before we encounter the path of sin what we're going to do. Solomon tells us to plan ahead to avoid it. Remember, I said earlier that the path of wisdom is active, not passive. We should actively avoid the paths that lead to wickedness. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 says that our sinful desires wage war against us. If they're actively trying to destroy us, we need to actively avoid the paths that lead to them. So I want to take a second to discuss again another question. What temptations wage war against you, and how can you actively avoid them? All right, let's look closer at those who choose the path of wickedness. Verses 16 says, "For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence." Now, I've never gone to bed hungry. I've been blessed in that way. And there are people around the world who do. And I imagine that maybe some nights they lay in bed and they think about the things they need to survive in life, the food that they need to get through the day. And many times those people are in that place through no fault of their own. But I wanted to paint that picture for you, to get that idea in your head, because that's the idea that Solomon's about to paint for us about the wicked person. He says the wicked man feasts on wickedness. He drinks violence. That's what he lives on in some twisted way that nourishes him, gets him through the day. And when he lays down in bed in the night, if he hasn't had enough wickedness and hasn't had enough violence, he can't sleep. He needs more and more of it. And as we continue through looking at what it means to walk down the path of righteousness and avoid the path of wickedness, I want you to think about this question. How does wickedness lead to more wickedness? Can you think of some examples? Maybe a way to think about it, get to your own lives. Wickedness sounds like a rough word. How does small sins lead to more small sins? And how do those smaller sins lead to bigger and bigger sins in your life and my life? That's a discussion for us. All right, let's look at verses 18 and 19 and see what Solomon says about contrasting the paths. "But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble." The path of righteousness gets brighter and brighter as we walk upon it. It gets clearer and clearer the more we walk on the path of righteousness. Just as the day gets brighter and brighter between dawn and midday, the path becomes clearer and clearer the longer we walk on it. But the path of the wicked, it's dark. They don't even know what they're stumbling over as they stumble in the dark. I want us to do an activity. I want you to look up 2 Corinthians 4:4 and John 14:6 and see how this idea appears in the New Testament. This idea of being blinded to what you're tripping over and being on the right path. Discuss this question. If the path of wisdom is so clear and beneficial, why do so many not choose it? You see, Christ is the key to the path. We can't do it on our own. I can try and I can try and I can try. I can avoid it. I can put roadblocks up for sin in my life. But in reality, that is all behavior modification if I don't have Christ in my life. Without Christ, I can really not avoid the sins and the temptations that come my way. So let's finish up and let's look at what Solomon says about this. Look at verses 20 through 27. "My son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ears to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are like life to those who find them and healing to their flesh. Put away the crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet. Then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. We see here that the key to staying on the path of wisdom lies in the heart. Deuteronomy 30, verse 6, Ezekiel 36, verse 26, and Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33 all tell us that God is going to remake our heart. He's going to give us a new heart. He's going to change our hearts. And that happens through Christ when he comes in the New Testament. Christ changes our heart. He now writes the word on our heart, and we can avoid the sin that comes our way. It's not just behavior modification. Christ has changed our hearts so that we want to act differently, and he gives us wise ways to live and avoid the path of wickedness. He is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. Wisdom leads to life. The path of wisdom leads to life. The way of Christ leads to life. Solomon goes on to say that now that Christ changed us and now we have the word written on our hearts, now we can be proactive. He says, look straight ahead. Set your feet in the right direction and now walk. He says, you now, with a changed heart, can walk on the path of righteousness and avoid the path of wickedness. So my challenge for you this week is, what are things in your life that are waging war against you? What are some unwise choices you're making? I want to challenge you to look to the Lord and ask him, help me make these choices correctly. Help me stay on the path of righteousness. Avoid the path of wickedness. Don't go looking for those temptations. And I encourage you this week to rely on the Lord to do in you what he has recreated your heart to do, and that is love him and love others and walk righteously before him.